introduction. So we have for the last slot today on the leadership and mental training day, we have Laurin Conlin, who is an IFBB pro bikini competitor and the owner of Team Loco Fit. She's earned her BS from Florida State University and her master's in science from the University of South Florida, both in exercise science. She she did all that under Dr. Bill Campbell in the Physique Enhancement Lab, which they just published your paper. So congratulations on that, long time coming.
Thank you.
Yes. And she also lectures internationally on topics including nutrition, training, psychological aspects of dieting, fitness entrepreneurship, and then what she's going to be presenting on today, leadership strategies for coaches. And also she has her own podcast as well. So make sure you guys go check out everything that she has going on. A lot of really great information, great content, and her team does awesome work. So Laurin, it is all yours. Take it away.
Well, thank you for the great introduction. And yeah, I'm so happy that paper finally got published. It's been many years in the making, but thank you guys for tuning in. I'm really, really excited to talk on this. When Tony asked me to speak on leadership, I was really excited because it's something that I've developed a unique interest in since I've become a coach. And one of the things, and we'll touch on this, but especially coming from the more scientific background, I find that a lot of coaches who are in that mindset sometimes can lose the application aspect, right? So this is why I'm really excited, especially about this, so that we can kind of learn to blend those things, because honestly, the magic is not just in the science, but it's also in the art, and particularly with the communication and leadership strategies. So I'll just briefly talk a little bit about us because Tony already did that, but basically started coaching in 2013 during my undergrad. I hired my first coach in 2018, and now we're a team of 4, all amazing coaches. And by 2022, every coach will have their master's in the field. So something that I'm very proud of. And everybody has a different combination of skills between our education and our competitive endeavors, and actually all of our personal challenges with food throughout our lives. That's really influenced the direction of our coaching style. So let's first define leadership, because we're talking about leadership today. So if you go on Wikipedia, leadership is both a research area, a practical skill encompassing the ability of an individual, group, or organization to lead, influence, or guide other individuals, teams, or entire organizations. So when we hear the word leadership, I think a lot of people think that, oh, that doesn't apply to me, especially in our space. I find that a lot of people in the fitness industry just really don't think of leadership as something that is important for them. And they're really focused on either the science or their own personal experience or things of that nature, but leadership kind of gets taken away. And especially if you are somebody who, say, you work you work at a gym or you work at a school, you're like, oh, I'm not the boss. It doesn't really matter. But leadership affects every single person on an individual level, as well as everybody on your team. And I really can't think of a situation that doesn't involve leadership when you're talking about other people. So it really is this delicate balance and a dynamic process that will look different for each business and each person. And I know everybody here probably has a different background and a different business. So the questions, we can, dial them in depending on, what background you have, whether you're in person or you're online or you're a combination of both. So why do coaches need leadership strategies? First, like I kind of opened with, we really need to bridge this gap between the bro science and the evidence-based communities. And oftentimes I think people think that these are much farther than they need to be. And really the best is to combine both of them, because we can learn a lot from both groups, and blending them is really key. You can also decrease the lack of understanding and miscommunication with your clients. This is key, especially if you are working online. It can be so challenging to develop the right communication techniques, and there oftentimes can be misunderstanding when there really doesn't need to be, unfortunately. And then lastly, learning how to balance egos, your clients, others in the industry, and of course, your own. And that's probably the most important that we need to learn how to balance here. So I'm going to have this in 3 main parts. We're going to first talk about leading yourself, because I think that's incredibly important. You need to be the leader of your own life, and that will allow you to be a better coach or a trainer. Then we're going to talk about leading clients. And then lastly, we're going to go into a few situations that I find come up quite a bit with coaching. So first, with leading yourself, you need to understand your weaknesses. We all have different weaknesses. So comparing yourself to other coaches in the trainer or trainers in the industry really is futile. And I think that sometimes comparing ourselves can be useful to say, okay, let's look and see how this person does this. But oftentimes I find that that comparison can just be more damaging because you're always going to look at the things that somebody else has that you don't. You're like, oh, well, they have this. That's why I'm not successful. We all have different strengths. We have different weaknesses. So being able to identify your own weaknesses and adapt is really what we need to do. Are you disorganized? Are you hot-headed? Are you emotional? Maybe you're too OCD for your own good. Do you feel really scattered and behind all the time? Everybody has different weaknesses. And of course, they can alter over time, but typically you're going to fall within certain patterns and behaviors. And your weaknesses will consume too much of your time and energy if you do not manage them. This is nobody's job but your own to manage them. So learn them and understand them. And then to counter that, you really need to develop your strengths. So be able to identify your weaknesses, build systems around that. But it's really important to develop your strengths as well. And yes, you do need to bring up those weaknesses. Like I said, identify them, work on them. And, so say you're disorganized. Well, you need to be organized, right? But maybe that doesn't have to be your number one priority. Maybe you have another strength. Maybe you're really, really creative and you should leverage that instead. So be organized enough, but then of course, leverage your creativity. And this will really set you apart as a coach or a trainer and allow you to excel for a long time. I think another conversation that we don't have enough in this industry, along with leadership, is just longevity. And a lot of times people are just very focused on the here and now. And we really need to think about, okay, how am I going to be successful for not just this month, this quarter, this year, but really for the next 10, 20 years. So leverage your strengths and create your business around them. A tool that I love and recommend to deepen your understanding of your strengths and your weaknesses is Understand Myself. It's actually a personality assessment tool. It's like $10 and it works off of the big 5 personality traits. It's a really well put together personality assessment. So I would really recommend it to you guys. And it's linked in here. So when you have the presentation, you can go right to it. Set systems up for your business. There is no one single way to be a coach or a trainer. There's literally no blueprint. I could tell you all the ins and outs of my business. Every coach on here we could all discuss our ins and outs and they'd all be a little bit different. And that's okay because you need to find the system that works for you most effectively and then go with that all in. If you're able to see clients in person, developing in-person communication skills is essential. And I would say that this is a little bit easier for most people, not for everybody, but for most people, because you're able to get that immediate feedback. Whereas online, it can be a little bit more challenging. If you are, for most people who here are working online, you're not typically engaging in person with your clients. You may never even meet your clients like once ever in all of your time working together. So you really need to figure out what is the best way to engage with them. And there's so many different ways. Spreadsheets, voice memos, video messages, phone calls, Zoom, like it doesn't matter. There's all these different ways. You need to find what works best for your business and ultimately that client. The other part too is that there's all these different processes that we have to set up. So for example, for the inquiry process, you really need to set this up and think about, okay, what is all the information that I need before I can actually implement, an onboarding process or even the initial call. So you're going to find yourself asking the same questions over and over again. And when you do that, you go, okay, I need to add another question, or I need to take this away or reword this. And that's really how you're going to update your systems. So everybody's inquiry process is a little bit different, but I would say having something that's, pretty straightforward that can kind of check all the boxes for you. So then when your initial consult comes around, whether that's a phone call, a Zoom call, or an in-person meeting, you're able to have all that information in front of you. And then when you are setting up somebody, when you're setting out their documents, again, have all of that like systematized. Of course, you need to add certain things there for the client, but have it all easy for you to do so that process is not incredibly laborious or disorganized. You really don't want to forget things, especially for your first engagement with a new client. Like, oh, sorry, I only attached half of your documents. You don't want to be doing that. Check-in process, same way. This is going to vary so much across clients. I know some people who only do phone calls. I know some people who only type. I know people who don't even have a check-in. Their check-in process is send me an email once a week. I know people who still do that in 2021 and they have really successful businesses. So that works for them. I would completely lose it, which is why I have a very different check-in process. But that is going to differ. And you're going to have to, again, understand your strengths, understand your weaknesses, and figure out what works for you and your life. And then lastly, for your payment process, make sure that you're going to have something that is, as streamlined as possible. When I first started, this was not a streamlined process in the least. And it's taken me 8 years to even get to a place where we've built out a site now that has like an online portal. People can log in and change things. And there's still some back end work that I need to do, probably a few hours a month. So it's much less invasive than it used to be. But figure out what works for you. And then when it stops working, that's when you need to adjust. I touched on this a little bit before, but being organized. The number one thing I see when coaches or trainers basically like run themselves or their business into the ground is when they're not organized. First, on a personal level, this is when you're going to constantly feel like you're drowning or playing catch up all the time. And now sometimes we just feel like that because we're really busy. But I would say that this definitely exacerbates it when you're not organized with all the things that I just talked about, the inquiries, the consults, the check-ins, the payment, all of that. You're going to feel so behind. But then on a professional level as well, if you're constantly late responding to clients, you're forgetting key information like things that you put on the plan, or you're missing calls or appointments, you are really going to struggle to have a successful business. People are going to fall off, and they're certainly not going to give you any referrals if you're in this situation. So one thing that we constantly hear still is some version of my coach would take over a week to respond to me, and I just felt like a number. So if you really want to stand out as a coach or trainer in this industry, make your clients feel important. Make your clients feel like they are not just a number. Actually respond to them in a timely manner. And this starts by being organized. Hold the line. You have to hold the line on yourself. You can have all these things. You can say, I have all these systems, I am organized and this and that. But if you have them, you need to implement them. And I totally understand. We all have off days. We have off weeks. Nobody is immune to them. We're not these robots. But if you have these good systems in place, it allows you to kind of have some off days and, fall back a little bit now and then. And your business won't just spiral out of control because you fell off or you were traveling a ton or whatever. So some examples here, and I know that sounds very just like, esoteric. What does that mean? Well, having non-negotiables for your day, setting response, those are things for you. Those are things to make you more productive. Having set response times. So say, for us, it's like, all right, within 24 hours, you're going to hear back from us. And usually it's about 8 hours, right? Like roughly people are going to send stuff in the night before, we're going to get to it that day. But there always is that buffer time just in case. And if I need to get out of that, I'm swift to tell them there's a change. Hey, I'm not going to be able to get to this day. You can send it here, et cetera, et cetera. Let them know what's going on. So clients aren't just like, wait, what's going on? What's happening? You haven't answered me. Work within optimal times for you. This is going to vary again, widely. Some people are morning people, some people are nighttime people. A lot of coaches and trainers have families. So are you working when your kids are at school or they're at daycare? Do you have another job and you're just doing this with a few clients on the side? All going to be very different for you as far as what's optimal. And then of course, training and eating in ways that support your productivity. This goes kind of back to the non-negotiables, but having a few things in your day that are going to make you a more productive person. And that goes back to, obviously training and eating right. And this leads perfectly into this part, which is to have goals for yourself. And I know this is actually something that I struggled with kind of recently. And I think a lot of us probably understand this. When you first started coaching or training, your own goals were the focus, right? Maybe you were an athlete in some capacity, or you still are, but maybe that was like your main thing. And also when you don't have a lot of clients, or maybe you're just starting out, you have more time that you can focus on your own goals. But then at some point, if you decided, all right, I want my business to be my main focus, I'm going to put all my time and all my energy into this. When that shift happened, it's really easy to lose sight of your own goals and sacrifice that extra time for the business. Oh, well, I have to work longer. so I'm not going to work out today. Or, oh shit, I need to wake up. I got to do all this stuff. And then by the time the end of the night comes, you're like, I don't want to lift now. I don't want to prep food now. I don't want to do any of these things that are going to make me feel better. And it's really, I never thought in my whole life that I would have to plan when I train. And it's kind of sad because I do love training. But it's something that like, there's just so many things to juggle that it's like, if I don't plan it, it's not going to get done. And it's not enough to just say anymore, oh, I'm going to train 4 times this week. I have to plan out, okay, roughly these are going to be the days. Of course, things come up. But ideally having a day and a time when you're going to train. That's a huge thing that we do with clients too, who were like, oh, I can't get this in. All right, well, we need to be a little bit more specific with those goals. So have this for yourself, because honestly, I thought that energy that I was putting into my business, like, I don't want to spend all this energy on my own goals. It's going to detract. But it's absolutely necessary to be functioning at your best. And when you're able to function at your best, you're able to be the better coach. And that doesn't just mean diet and training. That could be, meditation or some type of practice that you really enjoy, or, learning new things, et cetera, et cetera. So there's so many different ways to be a more productive person. But you have to have those goals for yourself, and don't think that it's selfish and taking away from your business. Now, doesn't mean that you're going to be able to train for 4 hours a day like maybe you used to. Maybe it's only an hour every, 4 times a week, but it's still something for yourself. And then, of course, lastly, continuing your education. Understandably, if you're on this webinar, you understand the importance of continuing education and you want to learn new skills. But just like having goals for yourself, it's really easy to just push this aside and to say, you know what, I'm kind of in a good period. Like I know a lot of stuff. I just really want to work. And there are times when work is just a grind. You're putting all of your resources into your clients or new projects or traveling or your family or whatever it is right now that might be taking more of your attention. And you're not a failure if you're not reading, like 47 new books and listening to a podcast every day, and joining every event. Like I understand that sometimes that could be very overwhelming too, especially through social media. People just, oh, I'm hitting this other goal. And you're like, well, what am I doing? So reassess and say, okay, recognize what you want to learn more about and create a realistic routine for yourself. So you're not just all in or all out with your continued education. So say, you know what, I want to go to a few, either seminars or webinars a year. I'm going to try to read this, these amount of books. And again, it doesn't have to be perfect. There's times where I don't read at all. And there's times where I read way more. Same with podcasts, but always kind of holding yourself accountable to continuing your education, because it's so easy to just kind of fall into what you know, and you just rely on that, which is incredibly important, but learning new things is key as well. So now we're going to transition to leading clients. And I would say that one of the most underrated values of leadership is just simply listening. This is actually much harder if you're naturally extroverted or talkative, or just, a little bit more aggressive and can be somebody who can take over a conversation. It's really easy to then fill in the blanks, right? Or to just kind of finish sentences or just interrupt in general, whether you're not trying to be rude or not. It just seems to happen sometimes with certain people. I'm speaking about myself as well, because I can just be so like aggressive. Like, and if you've already heard stuff for so many times, you're like, I already know where you're going with this. I remember, I don't know if anybody here follows Gary Vee, I'm sure, but he used to be like notorious for interrupting people. I'll be like, oh my gosh, why is this guy always interrupting people? And he finally like said something. He's like, I'm not interrupting people. I already know what they're going to say. I know that sounds rude. I'm not trying to be rude, but we have really limited time. And so I get it, but you're probably not in that context where you have like 37 seconds to like answer a question. So for the most part, listening is a very underrated value that you can have as a coach, or any type of leader, because what you're doing is you're letting the client share what they're actually going through and their perspective. And then you can actually change your approach that way. And this will really make more sense when we go through some of the examples later on, because you might not have even thought of the current problems that they're going through that lens. And without listening, you're not going to be able to solve that problem. So, there will be certain times where clients will come up with stuff and I'm like, I never even thought on any realm of possibility that this could be like a positive or a negative thing in someone's life. Like I've just never even thought about it. But just because I haven't thought about it doesn't mean that this client and maybe 10 others haven't, but I wouldn't have learned that if I didn't listen and I only looked at the outcome. If the outcome was, I'm not hitting X this week, and I just said, well, you're not following the plan, that wouldn't really be effective. I need to listen to what their actual struggle is and then be able to adapt the program that way. The next part of this is just asking the right questions. So if you have mastered listening, but you're not asking the right questions, you're still not really going to be that effective. And this goes for all interactions, initial application, consults, check-ins, phone calls. Um, it really is important. And that's why I said in the beginning, when you have these systems, if you find yourself asking the same questions over and over again, that's when you go, okay, I need to change this up front. So one great example was, a lot of times people will say, oh, my digestion was off this week. And I always found myself asking, well, how much water did you have? How much water did you have? Or just stuff like that. Or how much did you sleep this week? And it was never on our check-in sheet. And I was like, well, I keep asking this damn question. Why don't I just put it on the check-in sheet so I can see? Because then it's really easy if somebody says, my digestion was off this week, I don't know why. And I can say, oh, well, here's two things that I'm already tracking now, your fluid intake and your sleep. And if both of those are off, well, that's certainly going to impact it. Of course, for female clients, is it your cycle? How was your training? Was it really hard? So there's different ways that if you're listening and you're asking the right questions, you're actually going to be able to coach effectively. Another thing, and this went to actually, shout out to my coaches who came up with this. They wanted to add other things here because, again, one of the things that we started doing with a lot of clients was tracking not just macros, but tracking habits instead. So instead of just saying, well, it kind of felt very alienating for the clients who maybe weren't tracking their macros to then have this whole sheet on there that we're like, oh no, you're not filling that out. And it was kind of like, well, then what do we fill out, right? Because there's a few sheets on our check-in. So we decided to make an entire sheet of, okay, well, if you're not tracking macros and you're tracking habits, now you have this whole area for some quantitative feedback. And that's been a great thing to implement. But I wouldn't have been able to change that if I first hadn't listened. And then we, were starting to ask those questions. And then we were able to implement that for now everybody moving forward. So you need to listen, but you also need to direct the conversation in a way that allows you as a coach to give the best response. This is also really important with the initial either application or consult, because you can have a client, say you get on a phone call with them or a Zoom call, and they're just like going on about, the problems that they've been having. But they're including a lot of extraneous information, which again, part of you has to listen, right, to hear what they're saying. But the other part of it is you still have to be able to direct that conversation, because otherwise they're just going to be talking and you're not really going to know what you need to change because you're not getting the important information. So listening and asking the right questions are both equally as important. And then adjusting your methods with more information. So this goes for especially when you've already been working with a client, right? The initial program, which we'll get to, is just one part of it. But both on an individual client basis and also for the systems level, you need to just adjust things as you learn more. So let's say the client is struggling with just one certain aspect, right? Like let's say they're struggling with tracking macros. And you're like, all right, well, we need to fit this to your current needs. Do we need to maybe change what we're doing? Are we going to maybe not track at all? Are we going to switch it around? Habits, meal timing, what are we going to do? But then if multiple clients are going to present the same problem, where you're always altering the plan the same way, that's when you need to change things on a system level. Doesn't mean that, for the other client, they might be struggling with tracking. Doesn't mean that every client's struggling with that. But if you have 10 clients who present the same issue, all right, now it's kind of ringing some bells. We need to adjust this. You really can't get married to one method. And that's really hard. And that's, again, where that kind of ego detachment comes from. But you have to combine new information that you've learned, but also combine your coaching experience. And that's what has to get updated with time. There's so many things. I mean, even a year, 2 years, 5 years ago that I was thinking, thankfully I've updated those protocols, but it's crazy to think like if I hadn't and I'd just been married to that one thing, like, no, this is the right way, where we would be as a business. Well, I probably wouldn't have a business, to be honest. So next would be finding the right communication style. And this is probably going to be one of the harder aspects of coaching. And I would say, again, that in-person is very different than online, but both of them have their unique challenges. So as much as possible, you need to be able to detach from that emotion that the client is presenting in their check-in or their session. Now, again, we don't want to be robots. We do want to empathize with the emotions, but we can't let that drive your feedback or your responses. And I'm sure anybody here is listening who can relate on the online level. There are sometimes, especially, even people that you've worked with for a long time, some weeks they'll just come out of nowhere with like a totally different personality. And you're like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And now take that with you being in a bad mood, or like it being your last check-in, or you're really tired, or something else happened that day, and it could just be not good, right? Not good for either party. So, all right, this person is being a little bit more emotional than usual. Let me take a step. Why am I getting emotional? Okay, I need to take a step back here, and then you can reassess, and don't let that drive your feedback. Because ultimately, some clients are going to need a cheerleader, some are going to need more of a hard ass. And some weeks, the clients, like I said, who are pretty even keel are going to be really confrontational. And then some weeks, people who are normally one way are going to flip the other. So you really need to use your discretion to figure out what the client needs most in that particular situation. And as always, more communication is always better. But what I would say is eliminating as much miscommunication will really fix this. So for a lot of people, if they're struggling and I'm like, hey, we're not on the same page right now, is I'm not understanding what you're saying, and I don't know if you're understanding what I'm saying. Can we get on a phone call this week? And again, this is because I work in an online setting. If you're in person, this can be adjusted pretty quickly. But if you are online, oftentimes the phone call or the Zoom call is really beneficial because you can hear the tone, and you can also have a dialogue, so you can change things rather quickly. Another thing when you're leading clients is to understand that there is no perfect plan. And I know we just discussed a bunch of different topics on how to, be organized and have systems and how to lead people, but there really is no one way to do this. And like I said in the beginning, especially scientifically minded coaches, they can fixate on the smallest details, but none of that matters if it doesn't work for your client. So a great example that I've been asked now on multiple podcasts that I've just done recently was a rate of loss. What's the exact rate of loss that you set up for your clients for, a deficit? And, everybody's like spouting off these numbers. And I'm like, I don't really like, of course I have a general idea of, hey, we're roughly going to, aim for this fat loss goal, or, this body comp goal for you to be on stage. But I'm not really adjusting things based on an exact rate of loss, because I've worked with enough people to know that it doesn't necessarily pan out that way. There's going to be a lot of weeks where we don't see much progress. There's going to be other weeks where we see huge drops. And I'm not going to make necessarily changes just based off of that. I'm going to be looking at all the other biofeedback. So while I understand where people are coming from, sometimes I think we can get so lost in the weeds. Or what do you think about refeeds? Should you have them once a week, twice a week, 3 in a row? Should you split them up? Should you carb cycle? And it's like, those are all great questions. But what are we talking about? What client are we talking about? What situation are we talking about? There's some people that I never use refeeds with, other people that I use refeeds with all the time. So it's one of those things, we can't get stuck with just the one perfect plan. We have to take all the information in and then adjust it based on the client. And this is actually something that you have to communicate often with the client from the get-go, because they're thinking, oh, I signed up with a coach, they're going to have the perfect plan, perfect diet, or the perfect training, or the perfect whatever it is that you guys are doing. And you have to sometimes, we'll hear this sometimes, oh, this wasn't really different than what I was doing. Well, this is our first week and we don't want to just radically change things, because also we don't really like, if most of the time people are saying that they're doing one thing when they come to us with their inquiry, but oftentimes, what's actually happening is a little bit different as well. So it's important to not make radical changes, but to explain to the client, hey, the better plan comes from us adapting and making changes every week. This isn't like one plan and you stick with this the whole time. That's a very different scenario. And it's really important to have humility when you get it wrong. I don't care how skilled or smart or experienced you are going to get things wrong, and you're likely going to get a lot of things wrong. I heard from Brett Weinstein, this was on a podcast, and I just loved this quote. And it kind of sums up a lot of what we were talking about, was the ability to observe patterns as part of a scientific mindset. And I think that's so important, because again, we can get so caught up with, oh, this is my plan, this is what I've done, this is how everybody's been responding. But once you start to observe these patterns with enough people, you need to say, oh, wait, maybe I should change this. And then it's not that necessarily like you were wrong and you had this, these bad intentions, but you need to explain to the client, hey, maybe I got this wrong, or maybe this didn't work out, or hey, I learned this new thing, and you want to implement it. I hear that a lot when we go to seminars. People say, oh, well, I just learned all this new stuff at the seminar, but now my clients are going to think that I don't know anything if I implement it. But it's like, no, if you actually come to the client, you say, hey, I was at the seminar this weekend. There was a lot of really great presenters. I took these key things away. This one thing I thought would be awesome for you in particular. Are you willing to try it? I think it would work really well for these reasons. That client is going to trust you so much more, than you just being like, oh, well, I learned this new thing, but we haven't done it. Should I apply? I'm not going to apply it to them, because then they're going to think I don't know what I'm talking about. People, if you're not questioning and changing your methods, that should show more of a red flag than anything. So don't be scared to change that. I know I get that question a lot when we do events, live events. And I think it really shows humility when you say, hey, I learned something new and I think it'd be really awesome for you. Let's try it. So we're going to transition now to a few client scenarios that I created. And this is not just about one client. This is just a lot of clients all put in one. And I think a lot of people will be able to associate with these. So first question, well, why won't clients sign up? Is it because they want immediate results? So to be honest, most people want immediate results. You want immediate results. We all do. Nobody's like, man, I really want to put in like months and months to like have this awesome framework. But that's what we need to do as good coaches. Now, I will say, if somebody has just kind of hit their proverbial rock bottom and they've tried everything, and then they're coming to you, they're likely willing to do anything. Like, hey, doing anything means waiting 6 months. They're like, okay, like I got it. I've already been at the bottom. Can't get worse than this. But everyone here, no matter how impatient that we all are, we understand that the quick, fast, and these immediate methods just don't work. And that is why the client is reaching out to you, because what they've done in the past has not worked. So how do you change their mind? You need to create content that, this is for like initial, when the person is, trying to sign up, right? Creating content that clearly lays out your message to attract the right clients is absolutely essential. Most people who contact us now have heard our message through our podcasts or social media posts or something along those lines. So they know. They know where we're at. They know, a lot of our methods. They don't know, of course, our exact methods for them, but we share a lot about like how, especially on our podcast, because it's, long form content. And we really share a lot of the ins and outs of what we're doing as coaches. So when somebody signs up, they maybe like they're not like maybe super excited and like pumped up to like take a few months to build these habits, but they know what they're getting into. And it's not just like, oh, I saw your stuff, you looked great, or I saw this one thing. And they have all these ideas that we're not going to be able to execute on. So be honest and upfront with your very first interaction, whether that's a call or a consult, whether it's in person or online. And I know that it's really hard to tell clients what they don't want to hear, especially when you're first starting out, and you don't really have a lot of clients, and you want to build up your roster and et cetera. But there's really no worse feeling than going against what you believe is the best plan just to get a sign up. Because what's going to happen is, in the long run, you're not going to be happy and they're not going to be happy, and their expectations are not going to be met. There's only been a few times where I've gone against that kind of gut feeling of like, hey, I really don't know if I want to do this, but the client's really pushing me or whatever. It's only been a few times, and it's just never really worked out. And it's never worth it, like in any scenario. So let's take a hypothetical client, intake form, right? Let's say they have a long dieting history. They've been eating inconsistently for months. There were a few lifestyle factors that were disrupted, like their sleep and their stressors, but they want to lose 20 pounds. Well, we all know this is a pretty hard no for dieting, but you really don't want to come off too harshly either. You don't be like, oh my God, you're doing everything wrong. You can't diet for forever. Like it's going to be like, that's also not what you want to do, right? You as the coach need to go, okay, let's take in what we can immediately fix. Let's share those things. Hey, well, because you're struggling with XYZ, we can immediately do this. In the short term, we can expect these things to change. And here's what our long-term plan is. And that's really what the initial consult was all about. When somebody sends in a questionnaire, your first contact with them should be saying those 3 things. Here's immediately what we're going to do. Here's what we can focus on in the short term. And here's what our long-term game plan is. And sometimes I like to give people, rough outlines of months, especially if they are competitive athletes, just because it's nice to like kind of hear that. But it's really important to lay all of those out, because if you just only share the long-term goals, most people are going to get scared off. But if you only share the immediate things that are going to change, they're not going to stick around either. So you have to have all of those. And there's plenty of times where I say that kind of stuff to clients and they're like, oh, all right, that's way longer than I thought. Most of the time it comes with people who want to compete. I had a girl recently, and this has happened with, many people, but I think I want to compete. And she's eating, not that much. I mean, it's not a terrible situation, but, we need to bolster up your metabolism. We need to be eating more consistently, training harder, et cetera. And I was like, honestly, we need about a year. We need X amount of months to build you up, and we need about this many months to diet. And she was like, oh, really? I was like, yes. that's what it's going to be. And I was like, this could be plus or minus a little bit depending on how you respond. But I'm not going to tell you it's any shorter than that, because it likely won't be. And never heard back from her, which is not surprising. But I wouldn't tell her, yeah, we can get you on stage in 12 weeks. Like, that's what people want to hear, but that's absolutely not the right idea. And that's not something that I would be able to feel good about as a coach. So another scenario, my clients constantly fall off plan. Why can't they just adhere? It's easy. Well, whether we want to admit this or not, we've all probably found ourselves saying this. I get it. Trust me. It seems easy to us, but it really is just easy to us, not to the client. Hence why they're not adhering. And it's not enough to say, like, you're not following the plan. It's pretty obvious to you, and it's pretty obvious to the client. And previously in the industry, we used to hear a lot of things like, just follow the plan, right? And this created a lot of distrust between the coach and the client. And understandably, I mean, if you're falling off plan, who wants to tell their coach that when you're just going to get, we'll just follow it? Well, thanks, genius. Okay. So that creates a lot of distrust. That creates a big gap between you. And now the client really isn't sharing anything. So what the next swing that came was, okay, no. That's fine. We just need to get back on it. And I used to say this all the time, like, oh, you fell off plan. Like, you know what? It's okay. Like, let's just get back on it. But I'd honestly argue that that's probably not enough either. It's better, but it's not fixing the problem that, got us in this situation. So let's say a client is struggling with their adherence. I just can't seem to get these targets. I don't like tracking. I know I signed up for this, but it's just not working. Well, we need to ask more questions. Why isn't it working? Is it because you didn't have time to meal prep or grocery shop? Is it because you were relying too much on tracking food just as you went throughout the day and you weren't planning out your meals? Is it because there's a lot going on right now in your life and we need to set different targets? Maybe we need to create more of like a semi meal plan, like for yourself, and or maybe we need to go to habit tracking. If those are the questions you need to ask, because those are all very different responses. Well, if you can't meal prep or grocery shop, well, why don't we look into getting our groceries delivered, or use a meal prep company for the time being? Maybe you have a lot going on. Okay, why don't we just switch to habit tracking? Or, hey, why don't we just sit down and have these meal estimations every time you eat? Or are you just not logging properly? Are you just kind of eating at whim and you're not really eating meals? Well, that's a really easy thing that we can change. So it really depends. I just had this conversation with a client. Like, it just depends on what they're going through. And we were having some back and forth. And that's when I was like, we just need to get on a call. And it was literally a 15-minute call. I asked her some more questions. She was able to provide dialogue on what exactly she was struggling with. And I said, okay, well, let's do this for this week and we'll adjust it afterwards if this is still not working. And that's it. Instead of me bashing, my head against the screen, why can't she adhere to this? And her being like, I don't know why I signed up for this. I can't do it, because that's not helping either of us. Another common scenario is my clients don't do what I ask. I'm always chasing them down to turn in their updates. They change the plan on their own. They don't communicate effectively, et cetera, et cetera. Well, first, you need to look at your systems. Have you made it abundantly clear when and how you want check-ins filled out? Also, have you been doing what you say, or have you been late? Like, have you been slacking on your end? Or are you like not holding up your end of the bargain? So that's important to look at yourself first. And then second, just talk to them. It could be a simple misunderstanding. They could be terrible online communicators, or they just really don't understand what they're doing. I can't tell you how many times I have, worked with clients and they're, sending their updates. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this person just really doesn't like me. Like, they just don't like me. The way that they're communicating, they must not like me. They don't like the plan. They don't like anything that we're doing. And then we get on a call and it's like, it's great. And I'm like, they're like, I just, I'm not really that great at typing. Or like, typing, online in a communication fashion. I can talk all day. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe this is a better thing that we can do to check in semi-frequently to do this instead of just always going against what is, worked for you. Or maybe they just really don't understand it. They think they understand it. And you think that you've explained it 100 times, but I always like to remind myself, and then also tell the coaches on the team, sometimes you can say the same thing 10 times, but that like 11th time, if you change it a little bit, they understand it. So sometimes it's about just figuring out the right words for that person. And, again, you really need to make it clear how you want stuff done. Otherwise, the client's going to do whatever they think is best. So for this, example, there's a client who never turns their updated on time. They don't include the information that you need, and they often include irrelevant information for your purposes. I think we all have clients like this. You're like, hey, I like your dissertation. I appreciate it, but I don't need it. Can we get to the more important? That's where we go back to the guiding the right questions. So first, just be abundantly clear in your expectations with your update times. If you want your updates on a certain day by a certain time, you need to make that clear. We say that literally in the initial information that they're sent. This is how I want this. Instead of just send me when I first started, oh, just send me an email. It would never work now, right? When I had 5 clients, it didn't matter. But now when you have a whole team and you have other things going on, it becomes very, very overwhelming. So as soon as you can implement this type of stuff, the better. And it was funny. I was getting ready to compete actually. So it was a Friday, like night. I had just gotten my tan. And Eric Helms was actually, he was doing his PhD research, part of it over in Boca. And I happened to be doing a show in Boca. So he came by, we were in the hotel room and, we're just hanging out talking. And I was like, oh, I just got to finish this update. And he was like, what? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, you're doing an update at 6:00 on a Friday when you're competing tomorrow. And I was like, yeah, well, this person just sent it in late or sent it in this time. And he was like, you don't have days and times? And I was like, no. At this point, I'd already had a business for 3 years. Now, mind you, it was still small. So it was okay. But that was a perfect example of like, no, I shouldn't be doing this right now. Like this is not good for anybody. I'm not going to be giving the best as a coach. I mean, it's certainly obviously not going to help my performance tomorrow. So having those things really, really helped. And then, of course, say you're like, hey, I need Tony, you're my client. Can you send me your check-ins on Monday before noon? And that Tony's always late. And I'm like, God, like Tony, like get it together. But I'm like, is Monday like not working? You're like, oh no, Mondays are my worst day. Can we move it to Tuesday? Certainly, right? Like you don't want to always be like banging your head against the wall when you don't need to be. And you, again, can just communicate with the client and understand why you need certain information and why you don't need other things, right? Oftentimes when clients are including things that maybe aren't really relevant, you can just kind of move past it. Sometimes it might be, if they're sharing like maybe too much that you're not comfortable with, of course, you can let them know. But more importantly, you need them to fill up the important information and include what is relevant for your purposes. So that goes back to asking the right questions. And if somebody is always a little bit light on certain areas, just talk to them. Hey, I really need a little bit more information here. Could you provide that next week? And sometimes that takes weeks for people to get it. And then they just get it. And then lastly, my methods have always worked. Why can't this client just understand? And again, this is a little bit of an ego thing, and I get it because if you are established, you've been doing stuff for a long time, you've been seeing a lot of results with certain clients, and it can seem like, oh, everybody's going to fit this box, right? But as always, there's a balance between standing strong in your principles and beliefs, but also being flexible and adapting to the method. I'm not going to sit here and say that there's not an optimal way to do things. There is 100% an optimal way to coach people for specific goals, but 100% optimal is not going to work if the client is doing 0% of that. I'd rather them do 80% of optimal, and maybe it's not as great as it could be, but we're still doing a hell of a lot better than falling off or being on the plan for just a few days. So, a few situations, untracked meals during a cut. This was something that I never used to implement really ever. And then I started, okay, we're going to start doing untracked meals and adding more diet flexibility to clients, situations and what they're doing. And then I had a client who, typically we would cut those out, in a dieting phase, just to be a little bit more precise. And I've had a lot of clients over, the past few years who it's just worked out really nicely for them to have it. And these were clients, of course, we had, we worked together for months beforehand. They had a really great grasp on what they were doing. This wasn't like a novice, client. But, for one girl I'm thinking about, we've lost close to 25 pounds, and she has had probably 3 to 4 untracked meals per week because her job, she has to go out and eat with people. It's just part of what they have to do, certain businesses. And so for me to say like, oh, no, you can't do that, doesn't work for her life. So we've been able to work for her, and she's literally lost 25 pounds in this process, feels amazing, and doesn't feel restricted at all because of that. But she's still displaying a lot of restraint. She's not going to eat and ordering whatever she wants. She's still fitting it within her goals, but they're technically not tracked. Peak weeks. Most people think of peak weeks with, carbs and all this stuff, right? And then I had a client who was on keto, and I was like, oh shit, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? Like the only thing that I usually adjust is not really here. And now she was somebody who would tolerate a refeed every once in a while, especially as she got lean enough. But that was something where I was like, man, I have to default to another coach who has done a lot of keto peaks. Let me ask you some questions. What's worked, what hasn't? Let's try this with the client beforehand. But if I was like, yeah, we've been keto for your whole prep, why don't we just add a bunch of carbs right now? Because it's optimal. that would have been terrible. And then lastly, one thing that's really common and frustrating for both you and the client, but you might have had previous experience with this client. You might have had previous experience like with how they responded, but this time that you've worked together for like a cut or a prep or whatever is totally different for whatever reason. And that can really throw people for a loop. Like, wait, I was responding this way when we did this. Sometimes, your life is different and you might have totally different circumstances happening. And so there's a lot of things there. So again, be open and adapt. Remember, your job as a coach is to use your knowledge and experience to create the best plan for them. Coaching will always be a blend of both art and science. And sometimes it's a little more art, sometimes it's a little more science. It just depends on the situation. So thank you guys so much for your time. And let's open it for questions if you have any.
Awesome, Laurin. Thank you so much for the great presentation. A lot of really good stuff to go over. And again, guys, if you have questions, just tap the raise your hand thing and it'll put you to the top and we'll unmute you and you can ask questions, or you can type it in the chat below. So a quick one to kind of start things off is you talked about organizing the way you do your check-ins and organizing things with your clients. And do you have any tools that you recommend, any programs that you recommend in order to organize it? Like for me, I'm not the most tech savvy person, so I just have like client folders. But then that can get to be a little outrageous having, all these folders. So is there any technology or anything that you use to organize everything?
Well, seeing that I could barely turn my, Zoom on, probably not. I get asked this, like, oh, do you use like an app or do you use, we figured out, all right, we have a combination on our check-in. It's mostly quantitative and qualitative, right? So it's basically like a giant, Word doc, an Excel sheet mangled together. We have it accessible across all platforms, people, depending on, if they're on their phone or if they're on the Mac or, PC, whatever it is. So you can pretty much answer it anywhere. So we have all that. And then we've recently been using, it's called Loom, Loom. And so basically you can screen record just the screen, or you can just do talking, or you can talk and screen record. So that's been really, really useful. So sometimes we'll send that. Other times we'll just, answer on the check-in sheet. That's usually what we're doing. And then sometimes it's like, hey, there's a lot going on here. Like, let's get on a call. So no, I don't have anything fancy for that. It's more so like, all right, I'm putting these people on these days. These are the times that I'm, going to try to work in between. These are the times that I'm going to block off for this. It's more about organizing things on that kind of a level. But as far as like actual, like cool organizational things, I literally get made fun of notoriously. Oh, my light's propped up on here, but for my paper planner, like I was trying to schedule something with a group of people and they were like, hey, can we all get on a call? And I was like, whatever day. And I was like, I'll let you guys know in a few hours. When I get back to my planner. They're like, what? I was like, I'm at a show right now. I don't have my planner on me. And they were like, you have your phone. I was like, yeah, but it's different. Like so I'm a little bit more old school with that. But it's certainly an upgrade from just like, I used to just send like a Word doc in an email, or just send an email, which is, oh my gosh, I couldn't imagine doing that now. But no, it's more of the higher level organizing things on like a daily basis. And the actual coaching stuff. Like some people love the apps and all that. I used to, I don't even know if it's around anymore, but it was like a system like that, right? It was like a portal, and the clients logged in and it basically had my update sheet on there. And but I wasn't in control of that. So sometimes it would crash, sometimes it would not, they couldn't be able to log in. Sometimes I couldn't log in. I was like, no, this is not suitable. And then I found myself just replying to that email instead of like logging in. And I was like, well, this is stupid. So
yeah.
They probably updated since then, but I
would hope so.
Yeah, I'm sure they have, and there's many who do that, but for me, I'm a little more Google Docs and Word.
Right. I mean, you got to find what works best for you, right?
Exactly. And understand your weaknesses, and that is
for sure. And just the idea of like organizing, these are my Monday check-ins, these are my Tuesday check-ins, right? And that's so valuable, because I know there's a lot of times where people will have like set check-ins, like Monday, Thursday are my check-ins. And it's like, well, that may work when you have 15, 20 people, but when you get to 50, right, do you really want 50 check-ins a day? Being able to,
Well, yeah.
right, change that up and let people check in every day. And if you are a coach and you are looking for like organizational stuff for your clients, I know Meredith works with Jason Theobald, and he has his own organization thing. Meredith, if you can chime in and say what that is. I
Feed for
forget.
function, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a really good one. And Jason does a lot of really good stuff. Yeah, feed for function. So any questions, guys? I have a couple more. I'll keep going. So one of the things you went over was continuing to refine your process. And I think as people who are very driven, we're always trying to think of like the best thing, what's better, what can we continue to do to refine. And then the next thing you know, you have like a 3-page check-in, and then you give that to your client. Your client's like, I don't have time to fill this out, right? So where do you draw the line between over refinement and just good enough, right?
Yeah, well, part of that comes back to the listening, right? If you keep hearing the same thing over and over again, then you go, all right, maybe this is too lengthy, right? And that is something that we have heard from a handful of clients, but it's definitely the minority of clients. It's not everybody. So for those people, it's like, all right, well, why are they saying this? Okay, maybe they're new moms. They're a little pressed for time. Maybe they are like just starting out and they're traveling every week, right? So for those clients, it might be like, hey, here's a modified check-in. These are the base things that I need to know on a weekly basis. And if you can add more, that's great, but let's just start here. Because I don't want you to not get coaching because you don't want to fill out the check-in sheet. But we also can't coach effectively if we don't have any information, right? Because oftentimes when you just leave the reins off, yeah, just send me an email then again, you hear the thesis of what's going on in the week, but none of that is relevant for your information. So there has to be some direction, but there have been plenty of times where we do tone things down. Hey, like, let's just answer these few questions. Or even for some people, depending on their goals, it might be better to do, I hate saying bi-weekly, because to me that could be either twice a month or twice a week, but
it gets very confused. And I've figured that out. The whole bi-weekly thing throws people off.
I never say that because of that. I'm like, what's right? I don't know. But so every other week, right? That's how I just label it. For some clients, that might be better, right? Like, hey, let's just do every other week, because where your goals are right now and where your life is at right now, it's just going to be more suitable. And then for some people, like I said, if it really is coming down to like, they're not getting anything out of it because of that, okay, what can you do? And then of course, make it reasonable. Like, you have to, as the coach, you still have to be reasonable, like with what you can offer. But if it's something like, hey, just a quick call every other week, okay, we can do that, right? Like it just depends. But I would say for some people, they also might not be in the position to get coaching at that period of time, and that's also okay too. You sometimes have to tell people like, hey, after you've made a few adjustments, not just the first time, they're like, I can't fill this check-in sheet out. Well, then fire me. Like, that's, no. But after you've made several adjustments, if it's really just not working out for that person, like what they're doing, it might be better to have that conversation. Like, hey, I don't want to be doing a disservice to you either. So, what do you think is best right now? Like, do you want to just part ways here? Like, here's, or we could do, I don't know if everybody on here, you can offer different things for people too. Hey, maybe we don't need coaching. Maybe you just need like a call once a month and hear what the price would be for that. Yeah. Right. Like you could just do it differently depending on, what that person needs, and try to give them an option. I've really only ever fired 2 people in my whole 8 years. And it wasn't really a fired, it was more just like left on bad terms, I guess you could say. But like, rarely do you need to do that. There's, even within our whole team of all the coaches, I can think of just a handful of experiences that were just so like, this is not working. But oftentimes there is a solution there.
Yeah. No, that's
but I agree.
great.
You can get very, well, I should know this, and then this, and then this, and then you're thinking of it from the coaching perspective and not the client perspective, because as the client, Like if somebody sent that to you, you have to think, if somebody sent this to me, would I want to fill this out? Right? Like you have to think of it that way too. Like, damn, this is a lot of shit.
Right. Yeah. You have a 30-minute check-in every time you have to check in with your coach. And it's like, this is a lot, right?
Yeah.
Another thing is the idea of long-term goal setting and planning and short-term goal setting and planning that you talk with the initial consultation, which I really think is extremely valuable and important because you need to let them know kind of where your mindset is and the game plan moving forward so you can create that buy-in, but then also give them those short-term wins so that they feel motivated to continue to go. How often do you stack their goals with their whys, right? Like, do you ever get to know the person enough and figure out like why are you truly doing these things?
Yeah.
And then do you do a lot of that goal stacking of like, remember, this is why you're doing it. This is the goal that's going to get you there. So don't look at it as a negative, look at it as like, this is the step I need to take to get there. And like trying to turn those negative connotations that we have with nutrition and weight loss. Cause man, I don't know how many times I get people, especially in the strength sports where they're like, I'm on a diet and they'll email me like a weekend. We didn't change anything in their diet, but they just started a diet. Like, I'm so surprised I haven't lost any strength yet. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, you're eating the same amount of food. So how do you continue to like reinforce that to get rid of those negative connotations?
Yeah. Well, I would say first when you said, how do you get to know somebody? I would say that the, initial time that you talk to someone is a pretty good indicator, right? Even just asking on the application, what are your short-term goals? What are your long-term goals? I find that that's really important. And then sometimes, because you have to be able to kind of put people in touch with what is actually going to be able to happen, right? So we talked like, if the short-term goal is, that client example that I shared, which, just doing everything kind of wrong. And they're like, oh, short-term goal, lose 20 pounds. You're like, yeah, no. And then you find out the why. You're like, because I hate myself. You're like, all right, this is a totally different question. Or if it's like, hey, I'm not in this good spot right now, but I want to be healthier, like, to improve my health and my physique and, be better with my kids and this and that. And like, I understand, like, right, there's all these different whys. And, sometimes as the coach, you have to kind of read between the lines, right? And that's also where the phone call is really important. And, we have that, I just had a tough inquiry today with sent to another one of the coaches, and she was like, well, this is a little it was kind of like a red flag, where maybe it might be a little out of scope. And I am not above saying like if we cannot help somebody, we can't help you, you know what I mean? And that is totally fine. But sometimes when people write that on there, they might write something that seems very jarring, but it's only happened like once, right? Or like if they're having maybe some like eating issues, behavioral issues. Okay, is this like a recurrent thing? Did this just happen? Have you been dealing with this for 5 years? These are all important questions to ask. So I think that, again, asking the right questions to get to know somebody first, and then through that check-in process, if you're asking the right stuff, again, and giving them that platform to share, I find that most people will share. And if you are getting to a place where you feel like you're just not connecting with somebody, that's again when it's important to be like, let's get on a call or a Zoom or something, or tell me really kind of like where you're coming from with this lens. And that can change too. So I had a client situation recently where she came to me and she said, this is what I want to do. I want to fix my hormones. I want to do this, all this stuff. And I have a lot of clients, not just one client, it's a lot of clients who, I've had all this history. Now I want to, fix this. And that's a very hard client situation because there is no timeline. Somebody comes to me and they say, hey, I want to lose 15 pounds of body fat. It's fairly straightforward. Fixing hormonal issues from years of dieting is very, it can be 3 months or 3 years, right? Like, so that's a really hard thing. And for clients in that situation, you always have to bring them back to the like, well, why are we doing this? And at some point you do have to make concessions, right? Because you have to have those short-term goals, because otherwise somebody is going to be like, I am not going to stick with this. But when you say, okay, well, we're going to, we can do this, but this might set us back X amount of times. I just always want to be realistic with people, because you don't want to say like, I know you're really uncomfortable, but you haven't gotten your cycle back and we haven't stabilized your hormones, but yeah, sure, let's diet. And then, that pushes them back. And then they're like, well, you never told me it was going to do this. I want everybody to be fully understanding. If we do this, we're likely going to see this result. Everything has a reaction, right?
Yeah.
And we just have to be prepared for that. Same thing goes with prepping. I think that people really need to have a better understanding if they are going to do that, of what that entails. It's not just like this fairy tale thing where you put on a crystal bikini and you smile, and there's a lot that goes into it before and after. And I just I don't share this in a negative way. It's just like this is the reality. And then if you're like you have these low expectations of it, it's kind of like how Campbell, you guys don't know him, but Campbell always says stuff. When I first met him, I'm like, man, this guy's like brutal.
Yeah.
But my grad school advisor, and Tony's worked with him too, like was, I remember when I was recruiting for my study, he's like, we need to get at least this many people because like over 50% are going to drop out. Like, what? Horrifying.
Right.
You know what I mean? He was like, and then as we went along, he's like, well, it's probably more like 25, but we'd have to set the bar high because they could be that high and we need it. Okay.
Right.
Like doomsday over here.
Yeah.
But I think it's important to share all that. Like, hey, here's what could happen. Here's what generally happens. But here's this timeline of what is likely going to happen here. So I think part of it is asking the right stuff up front, building that relationship with the client as you are, working with them, and then being able to revisit that when needed, because some people are going to be like laser focused on their goal and other people are going to be getting sidetracked a lot just based on whatever. And that's again where that can kind of like clash heads a little bit, where the client maybe doesn't want to, they said that they wanted to do something but they really don't want to follow through with it. And that's where you as the coach have to say, all right, well, I don't have a perfect timeline here, but this is what is likely going to happen. And if you want, like, let's just say it's going to probably take 6 months. If you want this in a month, I'm sorry, but I can't help you.
Right.
Like, you have to say that, because what are you going to do? Put that person on a protocol that's going to get there in a month and then totally fuck their shit up forever long. And then, right. Like, it's not worth it for you or them, mostly for them. So.
Right. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time and the presentation. It was very, very good. Leadership is something that, like you said, doesn't necessarily get portrayed a lot as a vital characteristic or trait to have as an online coach or as a coach in our profession. But I think it's such a valuable thing, because if you don't take that seriously, then you can really put people in a negative spot. Right. So you have to understand that leading them and leading yourself is something that's going to be extremely valuable. So thank you so much for taking your time to do the presentation.
Yeah, of course. Thank you guys for having me. I hope you enjoyed it. If anybody has any questions, you can send me an email at Laurin, Laurin, at teamlocofit.com, or you can send me a message on Instagram. I might get to it like a little bit late, but I'll try to get to it. But just at Laurin Conlin, and I'll get you there. But I'm not the DM person. I'm more of an email person. So.
Fair enough. You laid the expectation, so they should know.
See, exactly. I laid it out. I might get to the DM in a week or 2 weeks. Email probably a day. So we're good.
There you go.